So,
All right, we're live. Giant Size Spectacular, episode 9.
how's it going?
Hey,
What's going on, guys?
Hello, hello.
lots
Been
and
a
lots.
week. Been a week of yeah.
So Dave, what happened? You were saying what happened to your computer?
I don't know if anybody finished the. Oh wait, hold on. We'll talk about that later. Yeah. Has anybody finished Lord of the Rings show? I was wondering if anybody had watched it yet.
I'm not caught up.
So I just finished the penultimate. So I just have one more episode to watch.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, we all got to finish the last episode.
Yeah.
Episode 8 came out today.
I think so. Yes.
I think so.
Is that are they done? Is it like the last of the series, or?
Don't know yet.
I heard they the deal was for 5 seasons.
Oh wow!
That's what.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's ambitious.
Yeah.
How many episodes a season?
I think it's 8 because I watched up to 7. So
Okay.
are we?
Wow.
Somewhere.
That's
Each episode is an hour.
Yeah.
So I mean,
It's a lot of information to cover.
yeah.
5 seasons. Wow.
I know.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So what you guys got going on?
So I was saying earlier that I didn't mention this, but a couple of weeks ago, so I used to work at a school as a school librarian, and there was a family there, great kids, great parents, and the son was going into this art school, this art high school, and is going into filmmaking. And so to get in, he had to make a movie. So he wrote this short film, this time travel film. He asked me to be in it, to play this doctor character. I was happy to do it. He ended up getting into school. Turned out really cool. It was a lot of fun. He's, I think, a junior now. And his mom contacted me a couple weeks ago and said, hey, he's doing another movie. Would you be interested in playing a part? They need an adult. Are you available to play? I said, yeah, sure. What's the role? And like, he's doing a Christmas version of Batman. It's the dark nightmare before Christmas, or the Dark Night Before Christmas. Yeah, the Dark Night Before Christmas. And I'm like, that is amazing. I'm like thinking, here it comes. Like, this is it. I'm finally gonna get to do it. I'm like, what part does he want me to play?
Wait. Dave and Johnny, what part do you think he was asked to play?
I mean, come on.
I could see the Joker. I mean, you got a nice skinny frame, a good laugh.
That's okay. Okay, cool.
Think of Commissioner Gordon?
I can see a Commissioner Gordon would make sense.
Those are both respectable. Wait. Hex Allen is in the chat.
Yeah,
Hex, if you're a quick enough draw, who do you think Peter was asked to play in this Batman fan fiction film? If you're quick enough draw, we'll wait for you to lob in your your thoughts, because I think those are both very, I think, legit. You could be a young Commissioner Gordon for sure. Yeah. You could definitely,
Yep. No, they needed someone. They need some. Yeah, Bruce
Look
Wayne.
at that. That's love, man. That's love. That's what I'm talking about, right?
That's what I'm talking about. Bruce Wayne. They needed me to come in and play Alfred.
Oh.
And I was just like, oh man, how old do you think I am? Like, it was. Yeah, it was like a tough one to come in and play, but I like really committed to it. I showed up in like a full 3-piece suit. I had like a vest, the tie. I had a pocket watch. Like I had the whole thing. I let them put some stuff in my hair to like kind of turn it gray. Gave me some like age lines and everything like that.
Yeah.
Only ended up shooting from my head up. It was just like an extreme close up the entire time. Trying to do like a Michael Caine accent. It was rough, but it turned out.
That was my
okay.
next question. My next question is how's the accent?
So I mean, I'm gonna ask their permission to see if we can play it,
Yes.
or at least play some clips of it. I think the accent was absolutely terrible. I make no claims of being able to do like a British accent or anything like that. Like I never, you know, I told him I would try. But yeah,
Is that what they asked for, the British accent?
They did. They asked for a Michael Caine kind of
Nice.
go for it.
I mean,
So Mel gave you the Bruce Wayne props, but not Batman.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't think I could do Batman either. Even Bruce Wayne would be. Yeah. Robin, I wouldn't mind. I would like a good Robin. I could handle that. I would like a good Robin. What the hell that is?
It's
like to play.
Yeah, it's funny because that brings up in my head. I'm trying to remember. Was Alfred always British, or was that always a film thing?
Yeah, no, I think he was.
I
was always British. He was always Alfred Pennyworth, right?
I was trying to remember the '66 Batman. Was that guy?
Oh,
was he just?
I think he did. I think he did have a.
I think he had an accent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that might be. It was something that popped in my head that
Yeah.
it makes sense, and I've never questioned it until you had to put on an accent.
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
should have gone with Alfred.
Yeah, you should just Americanized Alfred. You said no, we're doing it this way.
Right.
You know. What's up, Eric the Guapo? Good to have you in the chat, man. So we're just talking about a fanfic film that Peter was in that hopefully we'll get a chance to show maybe in the next show or two.
I believe he did win his. It was like a 48 or like 72 hour thing. Like they had to write it, shoot it. Like it was a very compressed thing. So they were definitely in a rush. But it was for a contest that they were doing, and I think they ended up winning. So
that's pretty neat.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. So I mean, your Alfred played a part in that,
right? Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's good stuff.
I can butler. Mr. Belvedere's next.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was homework. I was supposed to read. It was Crisis, right?
Yeah.
I didn't get to
Crisis.
Crisis.
You know what? It was a big ask. I read it. You know, because I haven't. I had to get a copy from the shop because it's 12 issues, and my issues are turning to papyrus.
Yeah.
They're turning into dust. But you know what? It was. It's funny. I mean, I didn't remember much about how the story went. In all honesty, like reading it, I realized, man, I don't really remember this story that well. You know, I guess there's been so many bastardizations of it since that, you know, and it's been so long since I saw the original. I was like, oh, this is how the original went.
Yeah. Did it read differently, like as far as what you're used to now? Like if you've been reading a lot of comics now, did the pacing or the panels and the layouts, like does it feel like modern, or does it feel old or dated, or like what's the
it's definitely laid out. Let's see if I can find some of the pages that really kind of accentuate that. I mean, it's definitely laid out in a fashion that you just don't find today anymore, for better or for worse. I mean, I know the lighting isn't great, but it's like, you know, oftentimes you don't get this much kind of exposition, but exposition that's actually going somewhere. I mean, it's like, you know, they're pushing the story forward, but there's a lot of panels on these pages. You know, most of these pages have a lot of panels. You know, but it's not just you know, it's not just nonsense. You know, it's really moving the story forward, and you know, I enjoyed it. You know, it was one of those things where it's like, you know, you read it and you appreciate what a Herculean effort Wolfman and Perez put into this book. You know, the amount of research that they did on all these different characters that are history of DC. I mean, there are characters there, I mean, that I had absolutely forgotten about that were, you know, were involved, you know, kind of in this process. So, you know, I really appreciated it. I felt like it was, when you read it, you feel you don't feel like you're reading a crossover. You feel like you're reading an opus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You feel like you're reading, and if you read the foreword, that's what Wolfman talks about. I mean, this wasn't an idea cooked up in a boardroom that started getting executed a month or two later. This was something that these dudes have been wanting to do for decades. You know,
Wow.
and when you look at the artwork, I mean, even just how individual. I mean, there's so many characters in here, but how individual each of the characters look. You know, the depth of just kind of the storytelling with the different Earths, and just kind of equating these different eras with different Earths. And
Wow.
man, it's a monumental, like, Herculean task that they undertook here. I was just like, holy.
Does everyone get like a good chunk out of it? Like, if you're a fan of Green Lantern,
Yeah.
if you're a fan of Flash, like,
Yeah.
do you find yourself like waiting for each of those folks to come in, or do they manage to
They
like
really do a good job, because I do remember, like, I think if you're a Flash fan, I think, because you just mentioned a Flash,
Yeah.
you really come out of this loving the Flash even more if it's
Yeah, you
possible.
do.
You know, because Flash, they do a good job with the Flash, and they show different versions of the Flash from different eras, and
he's got to be one of the most complicated ones at this point with like all the different.
I think I mean, I could be incorrect, but I believe the concept of the Earth, the multiple Earths, comes from the Flash books, right? That's where they started doing that, right?
That sounds.
I
about
believe
right.
so. I believe the crossovers, or that whole concept, started with kind of Barry Allen and Jay Garrick Flashes. You know,
Yeah.
somehow, breaking the time barrier.
Yeah, breaking through multiple Earths, and
Yeah.
then it was something that they just were able to do because they wanted the characters to interact. I got into Crisis. Crisis was like, I got into DC because of Crisis, because I was always confused, because I was just so late to the game. But Crisis is a thing that pretty much solidified it into one thing, and then I started reading DC book, because there was all these characters in there showing up that I was like, because when I first saw the Huntress, there's the Huntress, and the Huntress is Batman and Catwoman's daughter, and I just thought that was so cool, you know. But she's from a different Earth, and then they had this older version of Robin, and he's like in his 40s, and you're like, Robin grew up, it was like really, really, really cool stuff.
Yeah.
I actually bought the book, I think last year. I let John borrow it.
Isn't it cool that like they cared enough about like the storylines and the continuity to like do that and to like fix it? I mean, like that's really interesting that they were like, no, we actually need to do this, and we need to.
Because the stories you got, because I couldn't make heads or tails of what's going on with a lot of things I used to read now, because they're in a series. Because I think now, as I said, stories become very convoluted if you have, because you think about the Marvel comics I liked in the 80s and then the early part of the 90s, and then I stopped reading, so I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think someone was explaining, one of my buddies, I'll say my buddy Lance, was trying to explain a book I used to read, because he's still reading it. It's a book we all loved, and I'm not going to get into it. But he was trying to explain what they were doing, and I was literally like, just stop. I was like, my brain is hurting now, because the storylines are so convoluted, and then they have, because how do you make it interesting if you're working on it now, you're trying to make it interesting for you and make it interesting for newer readers. But if you have a connection to the older stuff, it's harder for you to go like, well, how could you change that? And why would you? I don't understand how you could do these offshoot versions that are literally like a character derivative of a character you like. They go, okay, well, this is now going to be this guy, and you're like, it's the same guy, you know.
Right,
But
right.
newer fans don't know that, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that was really cool about this book, I mean, in terms of how it's structured, you kind of have two narrators, a character called kind of Harbinger and
Yeah.
Pariah. And those two characters are kind of like the narrators of the story. So they're kind of they're kind of the through line through the story. And then throughout the 12 different episodes, you have different heroes that are kind of, they're dynamic characters, but they're kind of starring in different portions of the story.
Yeah.
So you get your fix of just about everybody, you know, as they push the story along. But having those narrators, then they're able to jump to other characters and other parts and other worlds or different. So it's structured well because, I mean, if you're a Superman fan, it's not a Superman book, but you get to see, you know, Earth 1, Earth 2 Superman. You get to see, you know, how they work together. You get to see Superboy, and you get to, they give you some semblance of like, this is how all these different characters, you know, coexist in their respective universes. And then they ended up with, you end up with one Earth.
Yes.
And then one kind of consolidated history and a lot of characters that, you know, get erased.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. Because they wanted it to be one thing, and then so now, you know, I want to say I'm about 13, and that's actually when John Byrne gets on Superman, and there's one Superman, just one.
Yeah.
So, and then the thing, he did a lot of things that we didn't like. He did a great book, but then there's like, because there was no Superboy.
Mm-hmm.
So his and Man of Steel, there's no Superboy.
That's right.
And we're like, wait a minute, there's no Superboy. That canceled out a lot of stuff. I mean, I was talking to another buddy of mine, and he was explaining to me how not having Superboy, how much stuff that canceled out. And then they had to find new ways to implement those characters.
Mm-hmm.
But like, yeah, they consolidated it all into one, which is great, because it was a great jumping off point for a person like me to finally read DC Comics, because I never read DC Comics.
Yeah.
But yeah,
and they did some interesting things. I mean, they killed Supergirl.
Mm-hmm.
They reverted Wonder Woman back to clay, so they kind of started her story.
Yeah, because then Perez does the Wonder Woman run after that.
Exactly.
Which was
amazing.
Amazing run. So they started Wonder Woman back over, and but
because they did Man of Steel. So Byrne did Man of Steel, and he was doing Action Comics, and then, like you said, Perez was doing Wonder Woman. I mean, you want to talk about restarting two of the three iconic heroes the right way. You know, the problem is staying on the rails. Because
the thing is, like I just said, I mean, I was digging with, because remember I mean, how Byrne I mean, Lex Luthor pre-crisis was completely different.
Yeah,
and Byrne is the one
so
who made.
Was he more like the cartoon, the super?
So, and Byrne is the one that made him, you know, this super rich businessman, you know, and who was awful. So, and that was all Byrne did that. And I think a lot of that probably you could probably say that they took some of that from the movie, from, you know, because Luthor was obsessed with real estate, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see them taking some of that from the film, but they even made him like a bigger, more well-established businessman. He's big time New York, you know, businessman that everyone loves. And then Superman comes to town, and he starts taking Lex Luthor's headlines, and Lex Luthor is jealous, and he wants to destroy Superman. So yeah. But like, Byrne had introduced all these different characters in his run, because, as I said before, I never knew about the New Gods really until I knew Calabac, and I knew Darkseid from the Super Friends cartoon, but I didn't know.
Exactly.
I didn't know about Darkseid from the comics. I didn't know, you know, Jack Kirby. I didn't know Jack Kirby like that he was had worked for DC like that, you know, because I always
Right.
thought it was a Marvel. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it was that's a pretty good book. That's a nice read, you know. I haven't read it in years myself. I'd like to give it a shot again if I ever get time.
It's worth revisiting. You know, kind of reading it when I'm older. I really got to enjoy, you know, just kind of like the painstaking work they did, you know, to put this together. Because before I was just enjoying all the heroes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, oh, who's this? Oh, this is cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't believe that happened.
Yeah.
You know.
Then you can get all the heroes together, and it's this big. It's a very big event because all the books coming out at the time had to follow the continuity of this one big event, you know.
Yeah.
And I didn't know. It was years and years and years. I forget. I think it was Nick and Dennis from the Comics Factory who told me. I'd never read Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which is Alan Moore doing the last Superman story. And if you guys have read that one, right?
Yeah.
I have not.
You should find that story. That's an incredible story. Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, and it's written by Alan Moore, and I mean, it's a really, really good story. It's because it's like literally saying goodbye to that continuity. He does a story where he says goodbye to that continuity. I never knew about it because, well, you know, because my whole thing is like, well, who drew it? You know, so that's why I never heard about it. You know, because you know, but like,
anytime I think Alan Moore is overrated, I go back to that one, and I'm just like,
I was like,
that was good. That was really good.
Yeah, and I think it's crazy because that's not, you know, I've had that thought too, but that's not his fault. That's just a lot of guys, subpar writers came in behind him, and like I think they tried to rip him off, and they rip off aspects of his style that aren't very that aren't his best qualities, I think.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? Did I say that right? I don't know.
No, that's fair.
Yeah.
Where'd Peter go?
Sorry, hold on.
See, he's still there. It's the shadow. No, but I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, for me, it's like, you know, like we talked about the Superman annual. I really enjoyed that Superman annual. That's a story I could definitely go back and read. You know, it just seemed like somewhere along the way, you just developed a hate for comics. You know, or maybe a hate for superheroes, or maybe it was just the establishment. You know, maybe it was just mad at it.
I think it had more to do with that, and I think it's one of those things where I have learned in my old age not to read or watch interviews with anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just I don't need to know what you think. You know.
Did you guys see when they had Alan Moore on The Simpsons?
I do remember that. Yeah, he was on there.
They had Alan Moore on The Simpsons, and it was something like, you know, Bart, he's in a convention line, he meets Alan Moore, and he's just like, "Oh man, I loved your run on Radioactive Man." And he's like, "Oh really? You loved it when I turned him into like an alcoholic, jazz musician who doesn't fight, with no superpowers." And Bart's just like, "I don't know, I just like when he punches people."
We kind of, so for Eric the Guapo's benefit, we kind of riffed into talking about Alan Moore, you know, and go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, sorry it started with Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. I'm highly recommending that book if you haven't read it.
That would be a good one for us to talk
about.
If Eric hasn't read that, he needs to read that because he's a Superman fan.
Oh yeah. Okay, let's do that next week. I'll rebuy it and dig it out somewhere.
I don't have that. I'm gonna have to go to the shop and pick that up.
That might be on the C app. You know, I'm always looking to see what I can get off those apps. So,
that's got to be on there. Let's see how much is that right now.
I hear you.
Hate superheroes. Now it's like get out of business. Then you always listing his like favorite mediums and comic books were always like, you know, below sculpture and like basket weaving and stuff like that.
He's like poo sculpting and then comics,
right? Yeah.
But with that said though, Eric, I have not read Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. I'm gonna pick it up at the shop, but I do have the Superman annual that was written by Alan Moore, and that is one of my favorite Superman stories. Yeah. If you've seen, let me put it on you. If you've seen the, Justice League Unlimited episode, I forgot what it was called. What do you get for the man who has everything?
Oh yeah,
something like that. That story is basically the animated version of Alan Moore's Superman annual, and I love that story.
Yeah. Well, there is a trade, so you can get the trade on Amazon.
It's worth it. It's a good story. So that's the thing. That's the thing with me and Alan Moore. It's like, some people think he's a bad writer. I don't think he's a bad writer. I just think that we were talking about either got disenfranchised or got angry, and then he just started, just decimating comics and deconstructing all the characters, and you're just like, what are you doing?
Yeah, well, it's like when it's like someone who's really into magic, and you like magicians, and then skeptic comes along and is like, I'm gonna like show you all the tricks and like tell you why this is all lame and terrible, and like just expose it all. It's like I don't want any of that. But he was always just like, no, this isn't any good. Let me tell you why superheroes are stupid and why these stories are derivative of this. Like he was always just like not on our side. It felt like.
But making a living doing it.
Yeah, a good living, a really good living doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because he got some of my dollars. Yeah. Maybe that's why I'm bitter.
That actually was the funny thing when I had read Watchmen. The fact that almost there are no superpowers in that other than Dr. Manhattan, there's which always came as superheroes don't have superpowers in this world. Oh, okay.
And it took me a minute dressing up,
yeah.
Which I in a superhero world I get, so that part doesn't bother me, but it was like, where's the fun? To me, exactly. As a kid, you love imagining having one power or another, or amazed at how they use a power. So that was always kind of the thing that always took me back, which was, not a huge deal in the story. He's telling his story, but it strikes me as a little strange when that is the case. That you're like, okay, he's imagining the quintessential superhero universe, and there are no superpowers.
Yeah.
So I guess that probably tells you a little something about the way he thinks. So it's always my.
Yeah, I struggled through that book.
That may have been why. I always
wanted to read his Swamp Thing, but every time I would pick up an issue of Swamp Thing and I would flip through it, I would see no Swamp Thing, and I was like, I don't get it. I was like, I'm sure it's cool. Everyone says it's great, but I'm like, if I don't see. Come on, I need to see Swamp Thing. Otherwise, I'm not shelling money out for this.
Yeah. So speaking of Swamp Thing, I did watch Werewolf by Night.
How is that?
I'll tell you what was. I liked the mood. They make it feel like an old Universal movie.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So that part was, I kind of like that approach. It's literally just a one shot.
Yeah,
I didn't like how I didn't like the way the werewolf looked. He didn't look like a werewolf.
The Man Thing was in that, right? Is that why you brought it up, because of Swamp Thing?
Yeah.
So Man Thing does.
Man Thing is in there.
Okay.
So I was thinking about Swamp Thing. And then
I saw him in the trailer, and that got me really excited about it. I wasn't too interested until I saw him.
Yeah.
Eric,
Yeah, man.
Eric is right on the money here.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
Yeah, exactly. And it's like you should never, especially these are the people that are paying your bills.
Yeah.
well, that's
You know
why
what I
I
mean?
said, that's why I said you don't want to read interviews, and that's why I stopped reading interviews with people or watching interviews, and because that was one of the things. Because remember, there was like it was so crazy. There was in the '90s there was Wizard magazine, and then now we're looking at 30 years later, and now like there's like all these websites and YouTube accounts, and like it's a rabbit hole because I fall down this rabbit hole sometimes when I'm like, well, what's going on? And the guys start explaining stuff, and then I'm like, oh, dude, I got to get out of here. There's just so much. There's too much information, and like yeah, it's just too much, and then it takes a lot of time, and you're like, I could be spending this time working on my own stuff or actually reading this stuff,
It's funny because and it's probably another reason not to do it, but along the same lines, I've looked up some characters on either their Wikipedia or like found a YouTube of the history of a character, and admittedly, a series that has to run for 200 issues, things are going to change, but the continuity goes so askew when you're dealing with so many years and different creators and all that. And so it's also how it's very hard because I'm listening to it and you're like, okay, if you try to piece together a hero's history, at some point, the ones that are done poorly, the character is completely 180'd somewhere in the middle of his history because time has moved on and they wanted to change it. And so I guess that's, to me, I think David and I have talked about this a few times. I wish that the big companies would literally do a restart every 10 years. I mean, they do it in subtle ways where the creative teams have moved on and they have ignored, plots that they didn't finish. But it still feels like I almost would rather them just start clean. Say, 2020, we're starting the whole line over. And then in 10 years, people will get bored and then they'll do it again.
I feel like they do, but I feel like they do it every 5 years. But they don't really say
5 years would work.
I don't really think they say they're doing it. I think they just do it, and then because all of a sudden there's a new event where people disappear, and then characters come back, and then old costumes show up, and every once in a while, what I used to do, every once in a while, I would buy the first couple issues where they would do a restart. And I would always think like, well, it's happening, so I'm gonna try to stick it out. And I couldn't even finish the sentence before I was like, okay, I'm done with this. Yeah, but like I was actively trying to do it for a while, but I realized a lot of the stuff that I liked was just so far removed from now, and it's interesting because I still like comics a lot, but there's a part of you that you realize that not everything's for you. So and you'll find something, and the stuff you like just still exists, and you can always go back to reading the old stuff, So that was my thing. That was why. But I honestly think they do just redo it every. They just don't say it, but it would be interesting if they just said, "Hey, 5 years, new Superman. What do you think of that?"
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, I also fell down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out when retconning became a thing. And in my research, this was probably 5 or 6 years ago because I hadn't been paying attention. They also I was looking at some Marvel stuff, and they started talking about how they made a canon decision to adjust how time moves in the Marvel universe so that they could still connect things like Tony Stark's origin in Vietnam War and the fact that he hasn't aged in 40 years, 50 years. And so hearing this, like somebody did some like high level thinking about how fast the Marvel Universe timeline moves compared to our world. And that's why all this is like, that was a few months ago. And I'm like, this is nuts because
Wow.
it makes no sense to try to like force that
Yeah,
concept to
because
me.
it's that thing where it's like, stories have to be finite, and a comic series. Imagine those hobbits still trying to get rid of that ring 40 years later. You know, you know.
That's like Gilligan still trying to get off the island, right?
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
because I remember my first thought when I watched the first, I think, premiere episode of Voyager, Star Trek Voyager, and they get lost. And keep in mind, we'd been through the original series, the the movies, Next Gen, and then DS9. Then we get to Voyager, and then I was at the end of the episode. They're like, "Oh, we're lost. We're this many years away to get back." And my mind went, "So when they get back, that's the series is over." And I was like, "Oh, okay. I don't need to watch this." It's like, okay, so it's Gilligan Island in space, which probably underrates it, but I never watched Voyager.
Yeah. I didn't either.
Yeah.
Well, that was I think that was a bit of a misstep in the conceptual side of it, because when you say something like we're 40 years away from returning home, I know it's supposed to sound like an impossible task, but it's also, you're like, they're not going to have 40 seasons of this show, so they're going to have to find some way to jump back in the end. But putting it such a far distance, I don't know. I mean, it seemed to be like, if they're never going to get home, what's the point?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely like that idea of them, restarting every couple of years. Yeah, they've definitely done it. Like they had the New 52 recently.
Yeah.
I mean,
new Tip 52 is like 10 years ago now.
that's true. That is pretty long ago. But I mean,
or longer.
It does seem like the old, like back in the day, like the old like Avengers and the old Fantastic Four. I mean, it did feel like they were just very much in kind of like this bubble, sort of like looping around, having adventures, and time didn't really need to move on. Like they can just sort of continue to do their thing. Like they decided to age or to go further and still look back on their continuity. And if they didn't constantly do that, if they just sort of kept themselves, doing Gilligan's Island, constantly like battling, Thanos, and then, oh shit, no, now it's another big guy, another, like.
Well, it's funny because I just looked at New 52, and that's 2011 to 2016.
Holy smokes.
Yep.
5 years.
They were done. It was time for something new.
Yeah.
And that's,
Eric was saying Future State is the newest reboot.
So like, what is that?
I don't know.
Yeah. Is that Marvel or DC?
Yeah, Eric, what is that? Man, but it's tough. I mean, it's like, and I get it. How do you contend with this? When you have, their IP, but it's different than like a Mickey Mouse. But they're trying to do kind of the Mickey Mouse with these characters where you need progression in the story, or else you have to blow it up and start it back over again. And it's like, it's a big challenge. I mean, you look at I realize that manga is a very different animal, and the way their IP is created is very different.
Yeah.
But and it brings a different challenge. If you really write your stories that way, then it's like you've got a whole new set of heroes now, as opposed to when you started. And I can understand where the challenge is with that. I was excited by that back in the day when the New Mutants came out. I mean, me and my friend were like, dude, this is our
X-Men.
Yeah. We're like, this is our generation's X-Men. So we're like, we have some X-Men books, but we don't have like the run start. I was like, we've got our own generation of X-Men now.
Well, did you guys, anyone read Children of the Atom? That new like X-Men thing they did, where it was like all the like it was like very progressive, right? Like a lot of, I think there was like a lot of LGBTQ characters in it, and like it was, it was very out there. but it had some cool stuff to it. The stuff that I liked about it was all the new stuff. I was totally fine with the new stuff. I was fine with the new characters. What I hated was when they kept tying it back to the X-Men, and I was realizing like what a weird state X-Men was in, and just how much I didn't like it. They're all living on that island, whatever, like Krakoa, and I was just like, I don't like that. Like, back to the mansion. No one wanted to hang out at the mansion. Professor Xavier is like walking around now with like this weird like helmet on his head, and I was like,
he's playing basketball,
right? Magneto is a good guy, and I'm like, okay, like all this sucks. Like I was totally fine with like, you know, everything else. Like I enjoy it. I like new stuff. Again, you know, like my favorite Superman is Blue Superman. Like I'm all for it. But
so Eric said he hasn't read the new Future State. I mean, I think one of the things for me, like going back to when the cartoon Robotech came out, you know, one thing I definitely realized about that is that, you know, if you write a good story, I'll be along for the generational changes.
I'm sorry, I just read this.
That seems like where it was heading. Like I was not enjoying any of that.
Oh, that's all bad. I'm glad that I did not waste my dollars. But like you think of like a Robotech, you know, it's like it was funny watching it because in a certain regard, as you go from generation to generation, you kind of mourn a little bit. You're like, man, I miss Rick Hunter. I miss, you know, but then you get into the new flow. Oh, this Southern Cross thing is cool. Then you go to the next. You're like, oh man, you know, I kind of missed Dana Sterling. Yeah. But this is cool. And you start to realize that like, oh man, I shouldn't even put this up there. Golly, come on, man.
That's
come
cool.
on, man. Come on, man.
I'm gonna read that right now if that's the case.
No, it was funny because
oh man, I lost my train of thought. Thanks, Eric.
I was watching a lot of I was posting some Gundam drawings on my Instagram, and I had all of a sudden I was following these different Gundam model builders, and they were following me. And a couple guys had asked me what was my favorite Gundam series, and I was kind of taken aback. I was like, huh, because there's so many series.
Yeah. And
it turns out the one I liked the most is the first one because that's the one that was easiest because it was so accessible for me to get into.
Yeah.
And because they have the first series that they turned into movies, and then from there they do a bunch of one-off, or they do a bunch of other series, and then they do what they would call side stories, all within like the same storyline. So the side stories didn't have anything to do with the regular characters at all. After the first series, they pushed a lot of the main characters from the first series in the background and brought in new people. And then the two main characters, they cap off their storyline at the end of this one last movie, Char's Counterattack. And then from there, they go on from there and like to still do stories in this universe with these giant robots, with these characters who have this new type ability. And it was like really cool because it was like, oh, well, the characters you like are there. They start off, they're kids, and then they grow up. And then, man, why did I just read that?
Sorry, man.
Was this in the Children of the Atom that I was talking about, or was this in something else? I gotta find this.
Oh my gosh.
Like ASAP.
I'm like in blurry flash mode. I'm gonna see if I can hop back out.
Yeah, what happened?
Yeah. It's.
All right, I'm gonna try not to crash this here. Let's see.
So what's this Children of the Atom? What is this?
So Children of the Atom was these like teenagers that were basically trying to emulate the X-Men.
Oh, there you go. That's why. Okay.
They were like these sort of wannabe X-Men, but I think a couple of them did turn out to actually be mutants. I don't know. It had some potential. I like what they were going for, but I'm really curious where where this X-Men Wolverine Jean Grey threesome.
That's weird.
Couple happens.
That's weird. Hey, did you guys ever read John Byrne's Superman Batman Generations?
Yeah.
Yes, I did read that. Yeah,
So
that was
Another
basically,
one.
yeah.
I have a
So
lot to catch
basically,
up
it goes through, I forgot how many generations of Batman. So you start off with Batman, he has, Dick Grayson as his Robin. You've got Superman, and you go through these different generations of Batman. And, I kind of like the idea. It's like, well, okay, I won't spoil it. I won't tell you what kind of happens at the end in case you want to pick it up. But I like the idea of a mantle that does actually get passed down. Because, the thing is, think about this. Just hypothetically, Superman is a being that, will outlive all of his contemporaries. Probably not age or anything like that. Can you imagine if Superman had been developed? And granted, I do not blame DC for this because they had no idea of knowing what they had, 80, 90 something years ago. But think of how amazing that would be to have Superman in these different eras. You know what I mean? So it's like all this circle of life is going on around him, and you could definitely see that he would change, right? Maybe he has his first love, Lois Lane, but then he stays young, she grows old, she dies, and then like maybe the Batman, it's like they toy with these kind of things in like, I guess in like Elseworlds type stories.
Yeah.
But to just to be like, okay, listen, we're gonna move this thing forward.
Well, see, that's what I was trying to get at with the manga stuff, with the Gundam stuff, is they were able to make the stories finite, and like they could end the characters. There's certain characters that would show up in the first series, then they're kids and they're using these giant robots. And then when they show up in a later series, they're reaching middle age. Oh, I don't do that anymore. I'm a journalist or I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
And, I always found that interesting because I had read Chris Claremont had an original plan for Scott Summers that they didn't let him do. He said, well, Scott Summers was supposed to get married to Madeline Pryor before she becomes a Goblin Queen. Scott Summers grows up, he gets married, they have kids, and he moves on, and he comes back every once in a while, as kind of a consultant to the X-Men.
Right.
But like he's moved on, he's grown up, and they were like, nope, can't do that. And then like there was a whole thing where, because I remember reading that whole thing, and I was like, Madeline Pryor I was like, what did they just do here? But because as much as people wanted things to change, they wanted them to stay the same.
Yeah.
So they wanted that whole Jean Grey thing still, even though she was gone. And that was when I'm sorry if you don't know, they killed Jean Grey and the Phoenix Saga. Don't worry, they bring her back. But
everybody comes back. Nobody stays in the grave.
Yeah, because that was the whole thing with Elektra, where in Daredevil they killed Elektra, and that was a big deal. And as long as they held on to that for a very long time, that Elektra was gone, she was not coming back.
That's
and
right.
And they kept trying to get Frank Miller to bring her back. They wanted Marvel to bring her, and then Frank brought her back. And then in the same issue, sorry, it's been like 30 plus years, and the same graphic now, he killed her again. Yeah,
Elektra lives.
Yeah, and Elektra lives. And the idea was at the end when Matt Murdock, who's not Daredevil in the story, which is beautiful because he's actually Matt Murdock, he even says in the story, he said, you could come back 1,000 times and it would end the same way. But now I hear she's back, and she's been back for years, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
You got to keep it for a little bit before you kill her again. So,
but I think stories can progress. Did any of you guys watch Vikings?
No,
I haven't watched that. Good.
So I enjoyed Vikings, and one of the things about it is you go through a couple of generations. So it starts off with like the legendary, you know, Viking. Man, his name just escaped me. And like you can't in the beginning with him and his wife, you can't imagine a story without them. But the story actually progresses, and you move through another generation, and they keep you enthralled, and you realize that, like, you know what? There's something cool to storytelling. Yeah, Ragnar Lothbrok, and being able to still honor the characters from the past without, rebooting them. You have the next generation, and I think that is maybe the path for, maybe indie books and these new books that are being made, because we have insight that Marvel and DC didn't have. It's like manga has shown us that you need to keep the story progressing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in the same quagmire that these guys are in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is, Superman, Clark Kent is a character that can persist. Batman, you got to hold on to the mantle, but you got to push it forward. A lot of these characters, you got to hold on to the mantle. What's the use of having all like a Green Lantern core and all these potential characters that can be the core when all you do is keep going back to the same guys? You kill them, you bring them back.
Well, that's the thing. That's why me and John on our off time, we were watching the Lakers dynasty documentary on Hulu, and I'll just say it plainly, we were getting emotional watching it because we were remembering, because the Lakers went through these different transitions where they had guys got older, and then guys, of course, they couldn't do it anymore, and then they had to create a new line of guys, and the Lakers kept having all these great periods. It's that in sports teams, they have these great periods, and then they have periods of like nothing, but they keep going. And that's the thing is like, you like, yeah, man, I really like, Shaq, but Shaq couldn't be playing like today, obviously, and but that's the thing is like, you go, man, would Wolverine still be beasting out like this at 70 something years old, but or how old he's supposed to be,
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like when you realize that, there are these elements. And speaking to what, Eric is saying here, a cartoon that I absolutely loved was they had 2 episodes of Batman Beyond, and they had the Future Justice League. So you had Superman, you had Big Barda, but you had a totally different Green Lantern. You had a totally different Hawkman. So I think it was like Hawkman. I think that Hawkman may have been Shira and John Stewart's son, I want to say. And then you had a different wielder, like I said, Green Lantern, and you had a different, like an Aqua Woman, and you had the generational shift. You had the certain characters like Superman and Barda that can just persist. Well, because the other characters are still there. So you had an Aqua character, you had a Green Lantern character. It was cool.
They had the whole idea of Batman Beyond. The whole idea of this guy is like he takes on this Batman mantle. He's not Bruce Wayne, so he's much different. He does everything different than him. That's interesting. That's why I was saying, I remember in a lot of guys, it's so funny when you talk about that the first issue, West Coast Avengers. I was talking to a guy, my friend, the other day, and I remember where I was when I picked that book up. He told me
I was all over that, man.
And like, because West Coast Avengers, and you're like, holy cow, how are they even doing this?
Because every superhero was in New York.
Exactly, and then they give Hawkeye.
Wonder Man out of California. They're just trying to get rid of him. Wonder Man was in California. Every other superhero was in New York.
Yeah, Hawkeye's got a team, and he's a leader, and it's like, whoa, that was pretty cool, man.
You're gonna do that. You're They got to do that as a movie. I
Did
think.
you read that? You have it on app. I've been begging you to read that first issue of West Coast Avengers #1. Please read that.
I think so. No, I think I read that.
Oh, okay. Wasn't it great?
I think I read that.
West Coast Avengers was great, and West Coast Adventures is where they actually went into all the story about like Scarlet Witch's kind of mental breaks and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
that's where they did all that.
Well, so you know what's also cool is I always talk about this at West Coast Avengers. my favorite thing, and because they always go into like, well, secret identities are dumb, and you're like, they're not, At West Coast, when Iron Man shows up to the West Coast Avengers, no one knows that it's not Tony, because they don't even know it's Tony Stark. They just, exactly. That
Okay.
covers.
Let's push up on that. Yes.
Yeah, dude. You couldn't get any better than that, man. Yeah, but like when Iron Man shows up, they just think, because they think Iron Man is Tony Stark's bodyguard, but in actuality, in the book, I'm sorry if I'm ruining it for everybody, Rhodey's in the costume. He's in the armor. Sorry.
If they don't know it by now,
they don't. Yeah.
Yeah, I never read this.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I just ruined it for you.
That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. Because I remember watching the film and I was like, well, that's where you take the characters. The next one is you do the West Coast Avengers in it. Because if like the main guys get to, well, I don't want to come back, you give them a break, and then you say, okay, well, now, Hawkeye's the leader of the team. The next movie's the West Coast Avengers. And you bring in all the lower characters that people that, but like to actually kill characters and send Captain America through time through this whole time jump thing that I didn't understand, because I was in the theater when that happened. I was like, huh?
The second they said the solution was going to be time travel, I was like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh, so we're doing time travel now. So the writers.
Worst possible solution to that storyline.
We're like, well, DC had Flashpoint, we'll have Marvel Point.
And it was crazy because like the build up to that was insane, because we were like, what are they going to do? How are they going to get out of this? How are they going to beat Thanos?
I sat in the theater and I said, oh no, this is just a big commercial for all those films I've already seen.
Yeah.
And that was disappointing to me. I mean, they went back to Earth for the most part. I mean, they're like, oh, we don't need to go outside. I mean, the end of the Infinity Gauntlet should have been galactic. It should have been.
Yeah.
But I'm not in charge. What do I know?
But they went.
None of us are.
Yeah, there was time travel. But like, no, what I mean, I told you it took me 30 years to finally read the end of Infinity Gauntlet, and I was floored by it. I was like, holy cow, this is amazing.
Did you read Thanos Quest?
I haven't read that yet. I need to read that.
Okay, so I have that. It's in.
I know. I'm borrowing it. I have.
God damn! I was just looking at my shelf.
Yeah, I have it here.
Dude,
yeah.
It's good. It's
really
good.
I gotta read it. Yeah. Stuff happens.
Yeah, sure.
I have a 4-year-old. He's not here now.
No, I haven't read that either.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff, man.
Yeah.
That's really good stuff because like I think when I was watching the Thor movie, first off, when I watched Guardians and there was the Collector, and then when I watched Thor Ragnarok, I was like, man, these characters, because I was looking at the Collector, I was like, he's way more powerful than this.
Yeah.
And then when I saw the Grand Master, I was like, Grandma, this, so it was just a weird thing where, you should just like, it's a movie, Well,
with Thanos Quest, like he's getting the Infinity Gauntlet put together, but like they haven't even established like what the hell those gems are. I think they were still calling all of them like the Soul Gems.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
They were all the same color. Like I think it was halfway through Thanos Quest that like they even started giving them different colors, and like it seemed to like what the Infinity Gauntlet turned out to be is definitely not what it started out as.
Yeah.
when Thanos was like looking for all this stuff and putting it together. It was, he gets the gems like nothing. It's just like each page. It's like, oh, I'm gonna beat you. All right, there's another gem.
Yeah. Yeah, no, because they all had to go and try to beat him in the Infinity Gauntlet, and he was mopping the floor with everybody. Everyone showed up, and he was just like he was taking them all on. It was pretty awesome, you know. But like I said, man, when I saw Infinity War, the first one, I was like, wow. Yes. No, well, I'm reading. Yeah,
David.
Yeah, they did.
Do you like Guardians more than Thor Ragnarok, or which is that the worst?
No, I think, yeah.
Both of them set kind of a low bar.
Yeah, the second Guardians for sure was. The first one had. I was really hoping the first Guardians was the jumping off point, not the establishment. Like they just established the Guardians as mercenaries, and I'm still a hardcore superhero fan. So I was waiting at the end of that movie. It made so much sense. Like, okay, now they can start being heroes.
Yeah.
And then they start the next movie, and they're like, oh no, they're exactly the same. They haven't learned anything.
They learned nothing. Yeah.
We're still a motley crew.
Oh yeah.
You can't go away from the shtick.
Not when it works.
Sorry, just not for me.
I'm going to show you guys some stuff that's hot off the press before we bounce. So, got my books published or got printed.
Cool.
Oh man!
So
great.
There's 3 different cover versions for Magna, the Last Pantheon, Volume 2. So this is kind of the first one. It's kind of like Behold the Pantheon. This one, she's getting mopped up by ISIS.
Dang.
That's cool, man.
And then this one, she is facing Samyaza in the kind of final showdown.
Dude, nice.
Wow.
But those are the 3 different cover options for that. And then the Posse. This is Fugitives. So I call this the Fugitives cover, as you can see why they're on the escape. This one is the Dinos.
Oh, nice one.
And their name is very much on the nose as villains. And this cover is actually an ode to.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
If you guys know the movie, it's actually an ode to Boys in the Hood.
Yeah.
So this is basically the cover to Boys in the Hood with Cuba Gooding Jr. in the middle and Ice Cube on the side, and I forgot the name of the dude. So the books are printed now, and we are now in fulfillment of the Indiegogo campaign. So looking forward to getting that fulfilled, getting that out to folks, and then just looking at other strategies for moving the books going forward. I'm not too sure if I'm going to do any more crowdfunding campaigns. I think I got to figure out how to sell on the. Yeah, man, that's Ricky. Oh man, he got shot up. All that. Ricky. But yeah. So I know we try to keep it within an hour. The show always goes fast because there's always so much fun stuff to talk about. I know we didn't even talk about Alex Ross's FF, so maybe that'll give me a chance to go grab it. Maybe I can find it.
Good. It's really, really good. I've read it twice now. I'm gonna read it a third time. It's very good.
Did you have to order it off Amazon or?
I ordered it off Amazon. It was like $20, and it's very cool.
Next week we're starting with that.
Okay.
Dig it.
All right, I'm gonna get it this week then.
Cool.
And I think I might pick up the Whatever Happened to Man tomorrow, so we can talk about that too.
Oh yeah, we got to talk about that too. Okay, so I'm going to the shop tomorrow.
That's the homework assignment. So next week, picking up
Whatever Happened to Man tomorrow.
Yeah, so I'll try to pick that up. I'll pick up both. I'll just order them off Amazon. I've been trying to buy them from my comic book store, but they have no copies. So looks like I have to resort.
Eric, it's really good. It's a lot of fun.
Homework for everyone. Fantastic Four for next week.
That is the homework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we appreciate Eric and Tom and Mel hopping in the chat and whoever else was in the chat. We'll be back at it next week.
Awesome.
All right.
All right.
See you guys.